Normally, when I start off an episode here on this show, I do my best to actually give an opening, a theme of what I'm wanting to talk about, and to give our viewers context on what to expect from the video. I'm not doing that this week. If I'm going to be entirely honest, I just kinda wanted to do a fun, silly video this week, and I'm going to hope you all enjoy it. I've been watching another YouTuber lately called Sarcastic, whose videos have mostly been about the world of shipping, or pairing two fictional characters together. I've been enjoying those so much that I wanted to do something like that myself, without stepping on Chorus's toes. So with all that said, hello ladies and gentlemen, I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome to my top 10 favorite canonical pairings. Couple of rules to start things out here, just so you know that there's some kind of method to my madness in picking these pairings over others when presenting them. First and foremost is that these are my personal favorite pairings. I'm not saying that any of them are better than yours, but these rankings are how much I enjoyed these pairings and wanted to expose them to others. The second rule I had is the fact that these pairings happened within the context of the show, video game, or movie that they came from. If you're a Zuko Katara fan like my sisters, more power to you. But as far as this list is concerned, I'm wanting to talk about romantic relationships that actually happened. If for some reason you actually want to see what favorite fan pairings I've got locked up in my head, by all means, tell me. I'll make that video. I'm honestly doing this one just for the fun of it. So with those rules set up, let's get on to the actual list. Number 10. Black Arachnia and Silverbolt from Transformers Beast Wars. I've just realized now that this is the first time I've talked about Beast Wars on this show since I started it over a year ago. And it's about the romance in it. Remind me to fix that later. Regardless, for a 90s era cartoon about transforming robots that was entirely a commercial to sell toys, Beast Wars had a remarkably well-told story and fairly deep characters. But for the most part, romance was a thing that you really saw in it until halfway through the series. It all started because Silverbolt, being the good boy that he is, refused to attack Black Arachnia despite her being on the enemy faction for the sole fact that she was female. While initially annoyed by his chivalrous attitude towards her, Black Arachnia would finally start to come around to being interested in him after the pair were stranded in the wilderness together and having to survive by working with each other. It was then that Silverbolt was convinced that the she-spider still had some good in her, while Black Arachnia herself was convinced that she could trust him, a rarity among Predacons. Mind you, her still being evil at the time did put a bit of a damper on things, but it was mostly because our spider lady here was trying to convince the Maximal both that she was evil and that she didn't care for him. Kind of hard to do when Silverbolt is willing to jump through all sorts of mental gymnastics to prove that she's still good.
You shot me, and yet you ensured the wound would not be mortal.
This is among the first real times in media that I ever got to see a villainous character turn over to the good guy's side. And despite how much I want to say that she did it out of her love for Silverbolt, that actually wasn't what made the final decision. It's the fact that Megatron's actions at the time would have killed her otherwise. And that's why these two are at the bottom of the list. Because while their romance is sweet and it's cool to see a too-good boy fall for the darkest of girls, they weren't the focus of their show. So as such, they're perfectly fine residing at the bottom slot. Number 9. Hiccup and Astrid from How to Train Your Dragon. I've honestly got to talk about this series as a whole someday on the channel, since there's so much good in here. Regardless, I love these two kids, if only because, well, we actually get to see them grow up between the films, and that's something we don't normally get to see when it comes to most movie franchises. What's more is how they're portrayed. Hiccup and Astrid both are an answer to what we saw a lot back during the Disney Renaissance, where the men were buff, powerful, and did things with strength, regardless if they weren't the meat lugheads their villains were, while the women were shown with grace, caring, and softness. The couple here turned that on its head, with Hiccup being the kind-hearted one that learns about dragons being big cats, while Astrid is the rough and tough fighter of the group. It slowly develops over the course of the movies, and if you're really into things, that TV series as well. I think what really strikes me about this particular ship is just how supportive they are of each other. Even if the film's focus isn't on the relationship, you get to see even from the first movie just how much the pair care for each other, through stuff like how they worry about each other, as well as things like Hiccup's first view of Astrid in the first film.
Astrid.
I'll be entirely honest and say I'm not into this series as most people are, which is why the couple isn't super high on the list, but I can't help but support a pairing, especially when the characters are done in unique ways, and do things with characters that we don't often get to see in films. If I ever get a bit more time to watch the franchise they made instead of just the movies, I might place them higher, but we'll see. Number 8. Korra and Asami from Legend of Korra. So yeah, it's not at all surprising that I put the first real lesbian pairing in cartoons up on here. And while yes, Korra's series was messy in a lot of respects when compared to The Last Airbender as far as the story itself goes, if there's one point where I actually feel that works, is how they handled things within their pairings. Romantic relationships, especially with teenagers, are messy and often crazy things. But once you get past that and into building the relationship between our two female characters, you've got something really special. What makes it so interesting is realizing how the weight of the world has been placed onto both Korra and Asami's shoulders by the end of the series. You've got one girl who's the Avatar Reborn and, let's be entirely honest, has gone through more physically harsh crap than Aang ever did in his series, while you've also got the other girl who's lost both parents, while also having to be the head of one of, if not the, biggest company in the world. You add in the romance between them and you got potentially one of the most interesting pairings on this list. But that's the key word here: potential. Romantic relationships between two same-sex characters never happened before in cartoons, and Nickelodeon did their absolute best to stomp that out as much as they possibly could. While we still got to see a lot of build-up in Korra and Asami's relationship, nothing official is ever said in the series itself, and it took the creators actually saying so later on that it was official. This would later be expounded upon within the comics made for Korra, with the pair entering a true relationship. I think what clinches this the most for me would probably be the time Korra is going through a rough patch, and the one person she reaches out to isn't her past boyfriend or her teammates from the sports bending, but Asami. And seeing from that point onward how much she tries to protect in Korra only adds more to it.
I want you to know that I'm here for you. If you ever want to talk, or anything.
Legend of Korra has a lot of issues as a series, that much is certain. But when it hits, it really hits. You'll see that a bit more in the future when I do a special Fascinating Fiction to celebrate its 10-year anniversary later on this year. Number 7. Carl and Ellie from Up. What happens when you've got a romantic story done in 5 minutes that is so expertly told that it eclipses the entire movie afterward it's trying to tell? You've got the movie Up from Pixar. And I'll be entirely honest, out of all of the pairings on this list, this is the one that I actually don't really follow in fandoms in the slightest. And the reason for that? It's perfect. In this 5-minute span, we get to see these two kids grow up into being a lovely couple, going through both wonderfully huge highs and the darkest of lows. And yet throughout the entire time, we see these two loving each other, supporting each other, and living out their wonderful adventure. I could watch the start of this film over and over and always be satisfied with how it's done. Honestly, nothing needs to be said more than that. It makes this list solely for being a near perfect pairing in cinematic history. Number 6. Ruby and Sapphire from Steven Universe. Okay, show of hands on who isn't at all surprised about Ruby and Sapphire making the list. Whereas Korra was only really able to hint at her own relationship within the series, Steven Universe was the first real cartoon that was able to have an on-screen romantic relationship between female characters. Now, admittedly, part of this came down to the design of the characters. There's a reason why everyone calls this show the one about the lesbian space rocks, but regardless of all the pairings and relationships we get to see coming out of this series that focuses on love and acceptance, it's the original pairing of Ruby and Sapphire that stands head and shoulders above the rest. I mean, how else could I say otherwise when talking about this series? Not only do we got a pair of characters who have been romantically involved for years, even getting married on screen, but it's their love that has been the entire reason for another character's existence, Garnet, for the length of the entire show. That's legit the reason they're not higher on this list, simply because we don't actually get to see much of these two romantic involvements because said love forms Garnet. The story about how they met and became to be what they are today is probably the story I still love the most, about Ruby wanting to protect Sapphire even as she realized that Sapphire had planned to sacrifice herself to an upcoming attack. It was this action that led to Garnet's very existence and her eventually joining the Crystal Gems, changing her entire life. Of course, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the song that Garnet is most known for, Stronger Than You. The very lyrics of the song spell out just what Garnet is, being a conversation and a feeling that has taken form thanks to the love between Ruby and Sapphire. And whenever something tries to take over their planet, they'll also fight with this song on their lips because
Stronger than you.
Number 5. Xanatos and Fox from Gargoyles. When it comes to villains in nearly all forms of media, there's generally two things that will happen when they fall in love. They'll either become good guys, or they'll end up using their love interest to strike at the hero. But like how Gargoyles did a lot of other things when it came to its storytelling, they love to do things differently, and in the case of the series antagonist David Xanatos, he eventually fell in love with fellow villain Fox, and the two stayed that way for the vast majority of the series, being antagonists until the very end of the second season of the show. What makes this even more interesting is how that love is portrayed. While we do see things like the characters kissing and even being together to have a kid, at the start of their relationship, Xanatos treats it more like a business offer than having any real affection for Fox. I'm serious, this is his reasons for them getting married.
We're genetically compatible, highly intelligent, and have the same goals. It makes perfect sense to get married.
And what's more is that he's not entirely wrong. There are few people who are able to match Xanatos wit for wit throughout the series, and this makes Fox a very perfect partner for him. One he eventually admits to loving for real, as seen in the end of this same episode, once they're finished saving her from a magical item gone crazy.
So now you know my weakness.
Only you would regard love as a weakness.
God, this is making me want to rewatch the entire series. Maybe I should get around to doing that Gargoyles retrospective I promised years ago on my old YouTube channel. Number 4. Toru and Kyo from Fruits Basket. I think you've all probably realized by this point how much I'm restraining myself when it comes to talking about most of these pairings. I'm doing that because I know for the fact that if I don't, I'll have an hour-long video talking about all these cute little couples I've enjoyed in stories. So yeah, having a couple being on this list in a series I've already talked about helps. With that said though, if you haven't finished watching Fruits Basket by the time you've gotten here, or for whatever reason you came here first, well, I'm sorry if you enjoyed the little bit of possible love triangle between Toru, Kyo, and Yuki, because this is the endgame pairing for it all. And it's a cute one because, like I said before in that previous video, Fruits Basket is all about the growth and development of its characters over the course of the series, and there are a few characters who grew up more than Kyo and Toru. What makes this such a wonderful pairing and so high up on the list, though, is just how much you're rooting for Kyo in this case. Not wanting to give too much of the plot away, Kyo is very much in a Beauty and the Beast situation within the series, where his designation as the Cat of the Zodiac makes it hard, if not impossible, for him to be loved and respected within his own family. Such treatment has made it hard for him to understand those same feelings from others. And, well, Toru's just the kind of girl who wouldn't want to impose on anyone, even if she's head over heels in love with them. I'm not wanting to say too much more because I've already gone into their series and I'm not wanting to spoil that much, but trust me when I say this is one of the cuter couples in anime. Number 3, Makoto and Joker from Persona 5. Okay, so I'm cheating just a little bit here, considering that this is a video game where the romantic interest is up to the player. But let's be entirely honest, for those of us who have played the game, these characters are kinda shipped by the writers themselves. More so than just about anyone else in the Phantom Thieves, Makoto here is given more character development thanks to how the story handles her, exposing her early to players and giving her many moments where we get to see her inner thoughts. She's portrayed as a smart, intelligent woman who's socially awkward enough that she doesn't really have a lot of friends. She's also constantly pressured by expectations of the adults around her, and it's only after joining up with the rest of the crew that she's really able to break free from those restraints. That's when the writers really start doing things that start to add up into her kinda being the main goal pairing for a lot of players. There's the fact that her codename is Queen, being the only other character barring the player to share a card-based codename. Her social link, where you get to learn more about her and delve deeper into who she is as a person, has you pretending to be her boyfriend for the vast majority of it, even confessing to her to actually be boyfriend and girlfriend should you go the romantic path. The writers even have Makoto latch onto Joker during a time when the group are in someone's house for a mission, with her being afraid of the dark and thunderstorms, even having another character pointing out their closeness.
Friends nowadays get that close to each other?
Again, I fully admit I'm cheating a bit here, considering the option of romance here is entirely left up to the player. But I feel like in this case, it was strongly hinted towards Makoto being the preferred pairing. And honestly, considering most of the other options, there are few who are better for the leader of the Phantom Thieves than his queen. Number 2, Luce and Amity from the Owl House. To paraphrase Sarcastic Chorus here, the pairing in the Owl House was able to exist thanks to the crack started by Korra and Asami and the door being opened thanks to Steven Universe. In other words, were it not for those two shows, Luce and Amity's relationship here wouldn't exist at all. And it's an adorable relationship that has a first of its very own too. It's the first normal relationship. So let me explain that a bit. Ever since Korra and Asami became a thing, creators have been able to sneak in same-sex relationships into their cartoons. But it had to be subtle, and it was almost always at the final episode of the show, because at that point no one could stop them. The show was going to be over anyway. The only reason Ruby and Sapphire were able to get away with it was likely because the characters were pitched to the networks as aliens and being living gemstones to boot. Luce and Amity here are the first real couple in the same sex category on a cartoon that's actually been able to just have a relationship that grows naturally over time, with the two starting as antagonists to each other, learning to understand each other, and eventually becoming girlfriends, with a little help from a particular demon owl to really pull things together. Honestly, I don't want to go too deep into things here because I enjoy this show so much, and if I delve super deep into things, I'd want to really go and give folks a spoiler warning. That's actually kind of my biggest deal with making videos. I don't want what I put online to negate the experience of enjoying it yourself. Regardless, I love these two so much, and I can only hope they pave the way for future same-sex couples in animation. A couple of honorable mentions before we hit our number 1. Link and Zelda from Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword is one of the few times these characters have actually been portrayed in a romantic relationship, and I wanted to mention at least one video game couple that players didn't have a hand in choosing. Bruce and Diana, Justice League Animated Series. I'm not the hugest fan of this pairing, simply because I feel like there are better couples out there for the Dark Knight, but Justice League Animated Series did such a good job in showing off the relationship that I had to mention it. Jack and Ashi from Samurai Jack. Season 5 of Samurai Jack is a weird beast for a lot of people, and mostly because of how it handled the romance in it. But I'll be entirely honest, at the end of it all, I just wanted our samurai to be happy in the end. A little sad that it took a video game to do that. Morticia and Gomez from the Addams Family. The oldest couple in this list in terms of when they were created, the Addams are, I think, what many people could agree on as the almost perfect couple. They love each other unconditionally and in their own weird way without the care of anybody else. There are few couples that function as well as these two. Bulma and Vegeta from Dragon Ball. The best pairing of Dragon Ball Z and Super that actually gets any focus. Sorry, Gohan and Videl. This is what happens when you smack the two biggest egos in Universe 7 together. Hell, I think Vegeta even says it best on why they got together.
Saiyans only like strong women.
Goliath and Elisa from Gargoyles. Xanatos and Fox may have actually gotten on the list because they're more interesting to me, but I just can't ignore the wonderful pairing of Gargoyle and Human here. Taking a page from Beauty and the Beast, it shows that just because someone is different doesn't mean they can't fall in love. And my number 1 favorite canon couple is Matrix and Andrea from Reboot. Yeah, if you've joined us here from my old YouTube channel, you're not at all going to be surprised about number 1. Considering I did a multi-hour retrospective on the Mainframe series Reboot in the style of Linkara's History of Power Rangers, I think it's obvious to say that I've got a strong love for this series. And in the case of these two, I think one of the reasons I enjoy them so much is the fact that we not only get to see their relationship grow, having the pair being lonely little kids finding each other and developing into a loving power couple, but it's the balance that they bring to each other. This might be repeating just a little bit from my retrospective, but one of the major things about Matrix's character as a whole is that he is the 90s edgy character. He's got the scars, the gun, and the attitude that would make him fit right in alongside of the darkest of 90s comic book characters. Andrea's kind and playful nature restrains his darker emotions and allows him to see the light in a world of black. Andrea is also better with her love than she is without him, being a character who lives for the thrill of things because of her game sprite nature. By being there for her, Matrix restrains her more wilder tendencies and will often be her center for looking things a bit more realistically. You add in how the pair are willing to sacrifice everything for each other, even their very lives, and you've got one of the best couples around. For me in particular, this is the canon ship and my most favorite in all of fiction. So yeah, I thank you all for going through this list with me. Like I said, this has kind of been bouncing around my head for ages now thanks to Sarcastic Chorus, who you should definitely check out if you're big into videos that talk about pairing characters together and that will analyze what's good and what's not so good about them. We'll be getting back to some normal fascinating fiction next week. Regardless, I hope that I've done a good job to entertain you, and I'll do my best to do so again in the future. Hopefully you'll follow along with my content by subscribing and doing all the other things that gives us YouTubers life. If you wish to support me a bit more, I do have a Patreon where you can get access to bonus content. But until next time, stay frosty.